this video, I'll be walking you through how to flavor and do a secondary fermentation on a batch of kombucha. If you watched my last video, I went over the process of brewing and doing the primary fermentation for a batch within this brewer's edge. This is pretty much picking up where I left off, assuming the kombucha finished its primary fermentation, and for this batch, I'm happy with the pH and the taste. So that's where I want to get into the flavoring and the secondary fermentation. So the first step would be to remove the SCOBY from the vessel you fermented in. I'm going to take this and just transfer it over to this other batch I have going. So next is to add the fruit in there for the flavoring and the secondary fermentation. So the sugars in the fruit will be basically the bacteria and yeast in the kombucha would feed on that. So I'm going to do a pineapple ginger, and I do roughly 1 cup of fruit for every gallon of kombucha. So right now I'm at about 6 gallons of kombucha, so I'll do 6 cups of pineapple, which equates to about 2 pineapples, and then I do ginger on top of that because you can't ever have too much ginger. So this will probably be about 1 cup or so of ginger. So I'm going to first cut this up. Alright, so now that I have all my fruit chopped up, I'm going to put it directly into the kombucha. Try not to splash too much. So I'm using fresh fruit. A lot of people use juice directly in here instead of actual fruit. I haven't really done that as much. If anybody has a good juice brand, feel free to put it in the comments and I'd be interested to try it out. Alright, so the fruit's in so that it can continue to ferment. The one thing to call out that's different than if you were doing the secondary fermentation in bottles is, when you're bottling, you have it closed off, so any of that CO2 that's expelled through the fermentation process is captured within the bottle, which will allow it to carbonate. With this, we won't be carbonating in here since I'll be putting it into a keg and doing a forced carb. So to allow that CO2 to escape, I use an airlock. And there's a number of different styles for this, but they all work the same. Essentially, there's a hole in the bottom, and the CO2 that's expelled during the fermentation can exit, and there'll be some liquid in here that it'll be able to go through and up and out. But the benefit is oxygen can't get in, which is something you don't want because, especially with the fruit in here, we don't want it to start to mold if there's oxygen present. So I use an airlock with this lid. So first off, I'll put the lid on. It's nice that this mash and boil has these little clamps on the side so that you can make sure it's a really tight seal. So now that's all ready. Like I mentioned with the airlock, you need to put some liquid in there. And I actually use Star San. In my last video, I talked a little bit about it. It's a sanitizer. And the reason you want to use that is you'll have the CO2 pushing up through the bottom. Sometimes you might get some sugars or fruit that actually get into this tube. So if you use water, there's the potential it could mold. But by having Star San, anything that might come up will be sanitized and there wouldn't be a chance of mold. Some other people use like vodka, but I've always just done Star San. But there's some line on each side which shows how high you should have your liquid. So right now mine's a little high, so I'm going to drain it out. So that's about right. So then I'll just cap it here. There, and that's all set for the secondary fermentation. So I usually only let this go a couple days. You can kind of try it out and see how long you want to go. Some people go a week or so. It's all kind of depending on taste, which with your spigot you can sample it every day. But if you do so, you'll notice it might start drawing some of the liquid that's in your airlock. So you'll just want to keep an eye on that. So yeah, that's how I go about flavoring and secondary fermentation. One thing I've heard people do is they'll do the flavoring and secondary fermentation directly in their corny keg. So the keg lid itself has a little prong with a hole where you could potentially tie off like a fabric tea bag full of fruit and do the flavoring in the keg. And then I've even heard of some people doing a natural carbonation that way, just from that fermentation process. Or they can do the forced carb still, but they actually flavor in the keg. Which I guess my questions would be, is that prone to clogging, or does the fruit produce any kind of off flavors as it's in there for an extended period of time? So yeah, if you've done that before, I'd be interested to hear how that works for you. But I've really only done it this way, and I've been pretty happy with the results. So that is pretty much what I wanted to cover in this video. Next video, I'll take this kombucha and go through the process of kegging and carbonating it. So stay tuned. Thanks.